The prison environment is a unique environment that survives due to the delicate balance between inmates and guards, and once that balance is upset, then unpredictability and chaos are bound to ensue. While guards in prison must supervise and enforce security in prison, they also must protect the inmates. Today we look at the story of guards who abused the prison's most dangerous inmates and regretted it. Thomas Edward Silverstein. First, we are going to begin with the story of Thomas Edward Silverstein, America's most dangerous prisoner. He was a criminal who spent the final 42 years of his life incarcerated following convictions for 4 distinct murders, one of which was later overturned. Notably, he was first placed in prison for armed robbery, but his time in prison will lead to him killing Merle Klutz, a prison guard. Thomas Edward Silverstein was born in Long Beach, California to Virginia Conway. He grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. Growing up, Silverstein was said to be timid, awkward, and shy, and was often bullied by peers. There are claims he was bullied because he was misidentified as Jewish. In response, his mother, Virginia Silverstein, insisted that her son stand up for himself, warning that if he ever returned home after being beaten by a bully, she was going to add to it. Silverstein recalled his mother saying, "That's how my mom was. She stood her mud. If someone came at you with a bat, you got your bat and you both went at it." When he was 14, Silverstein was sentenced to a reformatory under the California Youth Authority. He claimed that this experience there made him more violent, as according to him, those unwilling to fight were going to be more mistreated. In 1971, at 19 years old, Silverstein found himself in San Quentin Prison, California, following an armed robbery conviction. 4 years later, he was granted parole, only to be rearrested shortly thereafter alongside his father, Thomas Conway, and cousin Gerald Hoff, for their involvement in 3 armed robberies, which yielded less than $11,000. Subsequently, in 1977, Silverstein was sentenced to a 15-year term in Leavenworth, Kansas. During his time at Leavenworth, Silverstein established affiliations with the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1980, he was found guilty of the murder of fellow inmate Danny Atwell at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. Atwell reportedly refused to serve as a mule for Silverstein's drug operation. The conviction resulted in a life sentence, prompting Silverstein's transfer to the high-security United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, USP Marion. However, in 1985, the conviction was overturned due to revelations that the jailhouse informants who testified during his trial had provided false testimony. While at USP Marion, Silverstein was placed in what was known as the Control Unit, a form of virtual solitary confinement designated for inmates with severe management problems, meaning inmates prone to violent and disruptive behavior within the prison environment. His living conditions included continuous surveillance under a constant ceiling light so that the camera can see him 24/7. He was granted only 2 monthly phone calls and received his meals through a slot. In 1981, Silverstein again found himself implicated in the murder of Robert Chappelle, a member of the DC Blacks prison gang. Together with another inmate named Clayton Fountain, Silverstein was found guilty, leading to an additional life sentence. Due to the absence of federal-level capital punishment at that time, he avoided the potential of a death sentence. Despite his claims of innocence, Silverstein faced conviction. Notably, during the trial for Chappelle's murder, Raymond Lee Cadillac Smith, the leader of the DC Blacks prison gang, was transferred by the Bureau of Prisons from another facility to the Control Unit at Marion. Immediately upon Smith's arrival in the Control Unit, prison records indicate that he attempted to harm Silverstein. Reflecting on the situation, Silverstein recalled, "I tried to tell Cadillac that I didn't kill Chappelle, but he didn't believe me, and he bragged that he was going to kill me. Everyone knew what was going on, and no one did anything to keep us apart. The guards wanted one of us to kill the other." Eventually, Silverstein and Clayton Fountain ended Smith's life with a shank, stabbing him 67 times. Subsequently, they paraded Smith's lifeless body along the cell catwalk, proudly showing it to fellow prisoners. This incident resulted in another life sentence for Silverstein. On October 22, 1983, at USP Marion, Silverstein again then killed correction officer Merle Klutz. He was angry at Klutz for deliberately damaging his artworks. According to the Bureau of Prison, it was a procedure to confiscate artworks that depict acts of violence. Klutz had seized his artwork and Silverstein was angry. Exploiting a shower break to his advantage, Silverstein manipulated Klutz into moving ahead of him, strategically placing himself between Klutz and other officers. Pausing near the cell of fellow inmate Randy Gomez, Silverstein received a shank from Gomez and made use of a stolen key to free himself from handcuffs. Silverstein, now free, went ahead to stab Klutz over 50 times. At that time, the murder of federal prison guards was not considered capital punishment, so he was sentenced to life in prison, which was the maximum term available. After the killing of Klutz, USP Marion was subjected to an indefinite lockdown, which lasted for a staggering span of 23 years. In the aftermath of the Klutz murder, Silverstein was relocated to the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, Atlanta. There, he was confined to solitary isolation, security classification, no human contact. The death of correctional officer Klutz encouraged the conceptualization of federal supermax prisons, like the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, commonly known as ADX Florence or Supermax. Established in 1994, this facility was specifically designed to accommodate the most high-risk and dangerous. Silverstein ticked those checkboxes. There again, he was locked down with no human contact. Silverstein contended that the no human contact designation was a form of torture specifically reserved for individuals responsible for the death of correctional officers. He viewed it as the law being unfairly vindictive. According to him, the lights are kept on for 24 hours due to security reasons. The guards refused to talk to him out of respect for Klutz. Klutz was, for the most part, all by himself with only his pillows and the walls of his cell to talk to. Author Pete Early, quoting a Bureau of Prisons official, illuminated the rationale behind this severe treatment. When an inmate kills a guard, he must be punished. We can't execute Silverstein, so we have no choice but to make his life a living hell. Otherwise, other inmates will kill guards too. There has to be some supreme punishment. Every convict knows what Silverstein is going through. We want them to realize that if they cross the same line that he did, they will pay a heavy price. Silverstein told Early that, "I didn't come in here a killer, but in here you learn to hate." He told the author that the insanity in here is cultivated by the guards. They feed the beast that lingers within us all. Silverstein became a polarizing figure in jail. According to Early, it has reached the point where the white inmates consider him a saint or a martyr, on a par with Nelson Mandela, while the guards consider him to be the devil incarnate. Ted Sellers, a former inmate who had crossed paths with Silverstein during his 25-year prison term, portrayed him as something of a legend among inmates at Leavenworth. Sellers offered a different perspective from the portrayal often painted by authorities. He is not as bad as they portray. Sure, he is dangerous if they push him to the wall, but there were some dirty, rotten guards at Marion. They would purposely screw you around. You are dealing with a person locked up 23 hours a day. Of course, he's got a short fuse. After the murder of Klutz, the Bureau of Prisons subjected Silverstein to a stark and stripped-down existence, leaving him with just his boxer shorts and denying him any possessions within his cell. During this period, as security cameras were being installed, vigilant guards maintained constant surveillance, stationed outside his cell around the clock. This stringent regimen persisted for 6 months. Subsequently, the BOP gradually extended certain privileges to Silverstein, including access to television and materials for drawing. This shift in approach was influenced by the realization that to effectively control inmates, they have to have something that can be taken away from them. Silverstein spends most of his day drawing. The Bureau of Prisons, BOP, declined to permit Silverstein to participate in prison-sponsored art shows at Leavenworth, where inmates have the opportunity to showcase their artwork and sell it to the public. This decision stemmed from the BOP's intention to prevent Silverstein from benefiting financially from his infamous reputation. Silverstein's daily life is spent 23 hours within his cell. Periodically, an electronic door is opened for 1 hour, during which he can choose to step into either an outdoor recreation area or an indoor recreation cage. However, he is restricted from accessing the hallway, which is designated for officers' tasks, such as microwaving his meals or conducting face-to-face checkups. The indoor recreation cage is connected to a visiting room, but due to the Bureau of Prisons' prohibition on visitors for Silverstein, that space was never used. The entirety of his existence revolves around these 3 chambers, his cell, and the 2 recreation enclosures. Given the constant surveillance, the only time he can interact with anyone is when his food is delivered. On May 11, 2019, Thomas Edward Silverstein passed away at the age of 67 at St. Anthony Hospital located in Lakewood, Colorado. The cause of his death? Complications from heart surgery. You can say he died from a broken heart. Dachau Liberation Reprisals. Dachau was the earliest and one of the longest operating Nazi camps. Its doors opened on March 22, 1933, originally conceived to hold Hitler's political adversaries, including communists, social democrats, and dissidents. Under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, its purpose expanded to incorporate forced labor, and later, the incarceration of Jews, Romani people, German and Austrian criminals, and ultimately foreign nationals from the countries under German occupation or invasion, including American prisoners of war. Over time, the Dachau camp system grew to encompass nearly 100 subcamps, mainly work camps or Arbeitskommandos, dispersed across southern Germany and Austria. The main camp was liberated by U.S. forces on April 29, 1945. Within the camp, prisoners endured constant dread of brutal treatment and horrifying punishments, including confinement in standing cells, beatings, the infamous tree or pole hanging, and enduring prolonged periods of standing at attention. A documented count reveals around 32,000 deaths within the camp. At the time of liberation, about 10,000 7,000 out of the 30,000 prisoners were suffering from illnesses. The prisoner's entrance gate bears the inscription Arbeit macht frei, meaning work makes free, or work shall set you free in English. You could tell that the prisoners must have been very angry. As the wars concluded, camps were being liberated. One such camp was the Dachau concentration camp. However, during the Dachau liberation, there was a significant event. After their surrender, American troops and newly freed prisoners killed some of the camp guards. The precise count is a subject of debate, as some guards were slain during combat engagements, others while making efforts to surrender, and some others after their surrender. In the lead-up to the liberation of the camp, SS guards forced around 7,000 inmates to undertake a death march. Many were summarily executed, and others died of exposure. Upon the Allied forces' arrival and the subsequent liberation of Dachau, the soldiers encountered a scene of shock, horror, disturbance, and anger. The sight of numerous deceased prisoners and the aggressive behavior of certain remaining guards who reportedly opened fire on the liberators left a lasting impact on those who witnessed it. On April 29, 1945, soldiers from the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks, approached the expansive Dachau complex from the southwest. As they neared the area, they discovered a chilling scene. 39 railway boxcars positioned on tracks just outside the complex, containing approximately 2,000 emaciated corpses. One victim's crushed skull had left brain tissue splattered on the ground nearby. The overwhelming smell of decaying bodies and human waste, coupled with the sight of naked, severely malnourished bodies, evoked intense reactions among the advancing troops, including vomiting, tears, disbelief, and anger. Soldiers from H Company 22nd Regiment used a loudspeaker to call on the SS forces within the complex to surrender. However, the SS troops continued to fire at the Americans, refusing to surrender. As the troops ventured deeper into the complex and its prisoner areas, they encountered even more corpses. Some had been deceased for hours or days, their bodies lying where death had taken them. Among the grim discoveries were rows of concrete structures housing rooms filled with hundreds of naked and minimally clothed bodies stacked from floor to ceiling. Additionally, the soldiers encountered a coal-fired crematorium and a gas chamber. Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks recalled the overwhelming impact of the scene, noting the stench of death was overpowering. In the aftermath of Dachau's liberation, Walenty Lenarchik, a former prisoner at the camp, recounted a scene of intense emotions. He described how liberated prisoners surged towards the wire fences, lifting American soldiers onto their shoulders in a gesture of gratitude and relief. Meanwhile, other prisoners took matters into their own hands, going after the SS men. The initial SS guard attempted to push his way through the crowd, but as the determination of the prisoners grew, they overpowered the SS men. The exact details of what followed were obscured, but the outcome was grim as some SS men were killed. Elsewhere within the camp, scenes of retaliation played out as SS men, capos also known as prisoner functionaries, and informers became targets of violence. These individuals were subjected to beatings with fists, sticks, and shovels. Accounts of such retaliation included instances where U.S. soldiers averted their gaze as 2 inmates used a shovel to fatally beat a German guard. Lieutenant Bill Walsh witnessed this event. Another soldier observed an inmate viciously stomping on the face of an SS trooper until little remained. When the soldier questioned the inmate's deep-seated hatred, the response was a simple nod. Further stories emerged. 3 young Jewish men who had left the camp during the liberation told an American chaplain that they had beaten a particularly sadistic SS guard to death after discovering him hiding in a barn, disguised as a peasant. The emotions and actions witnessed during this period of liberation reveal the complex interplay of relief, rage, and the pursuit of justice. Following reports of the killings, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker, the Assistant Inspector General of the 7th Army, was tasked with investigating the incidents. Witnesses had come forward with testimonies about the killings, prompting his inquiry. On June 8, 1945, Whitaker issued a report titled Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau, also known as the IG Report. This report was discovered in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. in 1991 and subsequently made public. Whitaker's investigation revealed that near the back entrance of the camp, Lieutenant William P. Walsh, the commander of Company I, 157th Infantry, shot 4 German soldiers in a boxcar who had surrendered to him. Following this, PV-10 Albert C. Pruitt entered the boxcar and administered a coup de grace to the wounded men. After entering the camp, Walsh, along with Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead, organized the segregation of prisoners of war, POWs, into those belonging to the Wehrmacht and those affiliated with the SS. The SS members were led into a separate area and were summarily executed by members of the I Company, making use of various types of weapons. The investigation led to considerations of courts-martial for those involved, including Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, the battalion commander. Lieutenant Howard Buechner was cited in the report for dereliction of duty for failing to provide provide medical aid to the wounded SS men in the coal yard. However, General George S. Patton, who had recently been appointed as the military governor of Bavaria, opted to dismiss the charges. Consequently, the witnesses to the killings were never cross-examined in a court setting. Late 1945, Colonel Charles L. Decker, an acting deputy judge advocate, concluded that while there may have been a violation of international law, the conditions faced by the 1st Combat Troops upon their arrival made it challenging, if not impossible, to assign individual responsibility. As a result, Decker recommended against pursuing further actions. Attica prison riots. Prisoners are meant to be rehabilitated in prison, but the reality is that in large prisons, the dynamics that often ensue are one of domination and submission. The guards are the dominant, and the prisoners are the submissive. The truth is, when you gather a group of dangerous and unpredictable individuals in a place, they are less likely to conform to these dynamics, and prison can be a death trap for the guards. Take, for instance, the Attica prison riot, also known as the Attica Prison Rebellion. This tumultuous event commenced on September 9, 1971, and concluded on September 13, marking the deadliest occurrence in the history of prison uprisings within the United States. The Attica Uprising is widely regarded as a pivotal moment in the history of the prisoners' rights movement. In pursuit of improved living conditions and political rights, inmates staged a revolt, asserting that they were being treated inhumanely. The pivotal moment occurred on September 9, 1971, when around 1,281 of the roughly 2,200 incarcerated men at Attica Correctional Facility initiated a riot and managed to seize control of the prison premises, resulting in the kidnap of 42 staff members as hostages. Over the subsequent 4 days of negotiations, authorities conceded to 28 of the prisoners' demands, yet they remained unyielding regarding the removal of Attica's superintendent and complete amnesty for inmates involved in the prison takeover. In response, under the directive of Governor Nelson Rockefeller following consultation with President Richard M. Nixon, armed corrections officers, as well as state and local police, were deployed to regain control of the prison. The ensuing operation culminated in a tragic toll. At least 39 lives were lost, comprising 10 correctional officers and civilian employees, along with 29 inmates, the majority falling victim to gunfire from law enforcement personnel. Before the riots, inmates were locked in their cells for 14 to 16 hours. Their incoming and outgoing correspondence was subjected to scrutiny. They limited their reading material, family visits took place behind mesh screens, medical care was deplorable, and the parole system operated with glaring inequalities. The pervasive presence of racism further exacerbated the situation. Among the inmate population, African Americans constituted 54%, Puerto Ricans 9%, and white individuals 37%. Notably, all of the guards were white, according to some accounts. Within this racially charged context, guards frequently discarded letters written in Spanish to or from Puerto Rican prisoners and subjected black inmates to both menial employment and persistent racial harassment. The issue of overcrowding significantly compounded the already dire conditions, with the prison's population ballooning from its designed capacity for 1,200 inmates to an overwhelming 2,243 during that time. The inmates tried to take things into their hands through diplomatic means. In July of 1971, a cohort of Attica inmates sent an inventory of 27 demands aimed at enhancing conditions within the facility. These demands were submitted to Russell Oswald, the state's Commissioner of Corrections, and Governor Nelson Rockefeller. The spectrum of requests included dietary improvements, enhancements in the caliber of guards, the establishment of more robust rehabilitation programs, and, notably, the expansion of educational initiatives. The inmates also sought more religious freedom. Regrettably, the commissioner did not undertake any measures in response to the comprehensive list of demands. In a contrary move, Attica's warden, Vincent Mancusi, implemented further limitations on inmates' access to reading materials and personal possessions. On Wednesday, September 8, 1971, a critical incident unfolded, setting the stage for the riot that would erupt the following day. There was a confrontation during the inmates' recreational break. Two inmates engaged in a physical altercation, prompting a correctional officer to intervene. Although one of the inmates had already departed the scene, the officer instructed the remaining individual to return to his cell. A heated exchange ensued, culminating in the inmate hitting the officer. The altercation drew in other inmates and guards, escalating tensions further. However, before the situation could escalate into greater violence, Lieutenant Robert Curtis intervened to quell the disturbance. Later that same evening, Warden Vincent Mancusi issued an order for the transfer of the two inmates involved in the earlier altercation to solitary confinement. movement. However, when officers arrived to execute the directive, a group of fellow prisoners resisted the move. The inmates in that area vociferously expressed their opposition, hurling objects at the guards. Notably, one inmate named William Ortiz struck an officer with a can of soup, prompting the decision to subject him to keep lock, which was a form of isolation within his cell. On the morning of Thursday, September 9, 1971, tensions within the ranks of the prisoners in that area remained palpable, with lingering concerns about the fate of inmate William Ortiz. Eager for clarity, the inmates demanded answers from the officers regarding Ortiz's status. Officer Gordon Kelsey, faced with their inquiries, admitted his lack of knowledge and attempted to proceed with the daily routine. As the inmates made their way to breakfast, a group managed to manipulate Ortiz's cell door, facilitating his departure to the mess hall. Upon discovering this breach, the command staff swiftly decided to confine all members of that part of the prison back to their cells after the morning meal. Regrettably, this directive was not communicated to all the correctional officers. Consequently, when officers led the inmates toward the recreation area after breakfast, both the officers and inmates were taken aback to find the doors securely locked. Misinterpreting the situation, the inmates believed impending punishment was imminent. Next, there was a clash and all hell broke loose. Certain inmates turned their aggression toward the guards, while others attempted to escape. The disorder rapidly propagated to other close-by groups of inmates, fanning the flames of what would soon become a full-blown uprising. This stage of turmoil resulted in several guards and inmates sustaining injuries. Tragically, Officer William Quinn succumbed to injuries incurred during the initial riot, passing away in the hospital 2 days later. As the clock struck noon on September 9th, there was a partial sense of control within the prison. Correctional officers and law enforcement personnel managed to gain authority over roughly half of the prison population and its physical spaces. Meanwhile, a substantial faction comprising 1,281 of Attica's approximate 2,200 inmates controlled the remaining portions. This included the D-Yard, 2 tunnels, and a pivotal nerve center known as the Times Square, which housed the central control operations. Significantly, the inmates held 42 officers and civilian employees in a state of captivity, effectively transforming them into hostages. Once the inmates had effectively secured control over their section of the prison, they started to organize and govern themselves. Elected leaders were chosen to act as representatives in negotiations. Certain inmates assumed roles as medics and security personnel, and a comprehensive list of demands was meticulously crafted to serve as the basis for potential surrender conditions. Among these notable figures was Elliot James L.D. Barkley, a 21-year-old with eloquent oratory skills, played a pivotal role during the negotiations. He adeptly communicated with fellow inmates, journalists, and viewers at large, becoming a compelling force in the unfolding events. Tragically, Barkley, slated for imminent release at the time of the uprising, met his demise during the subsequent recapture of the prison. As their spokesperson, Barkley galvanized morale. He and the appointed negotiating team commenced the drafting of proposals intended for presentation to the commissioner. They formulated the Attica Liberation Faction Manifesto of Demands. This manifesto encompassed 33 distinct demands, spanning diverse aspects such as enhanced medical care, equitable visitation rights, improved dietary provisions, religious freedoms, fair compensation for inmate labor, and the cessation of physical abuse. It also called for fundamental necessities like regular access to toothbrushes and daily showers, professional training, and unrestricted access to reading materials. The inmates sought the involvement of a team of external observers, individuals deemed knowledgeable about prison conditions, many of whom were successfully persuaded by officials to participate in the Attica situation. Negotiations continued between the prisoners, their team of observers, and Commissioner of Corrections Russell Oswald. While Oswald assented to 28 of the inmates' demands, he remained steadfast against granting amnesty to those involved in the uprising or dismissing the Attica warden from his position. Attorney William Kunstler, who represented the inmates during negotiations, later stated, "The prisoners had 2 non-negotiable demands, the removal of the warden and general amnesty, and they had already given up on the removal of the warden. And on the general amnesty, we had worked out several formulas that we were discussing with the commissioner hours before the attack, and if we had been allowed to continue, everyone would be alive and the matter would be settled today." Governor Rockefeller's absence from the prison during these critical negotiations and his refusal to meet with the inmates added a layer of complexity to the situation. As negotiations broke down, Oswald's willingness or capacity to make additional concessions waned. Oswald and the Observers Committee urgently contacted Rockefeller, imploring him to visit the prison and defuse the situation, but he declined to do so. Following the governor's refusal, Oswald and Rockefeller reached an agreement that authorized the state police to forcefully retake the facility, a decision that garnered subsequent criticism. More than 100 prisoners and 10 of the hostages died during the retaking. We know for sure that the guards on the wrong end of these inmates' revenge might have wished they had taken a different approach with these prisoners. Who knows? Maybe it would have led to a different outcome. We hope that you have enjoyed this video. To enjoy more videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.